Welcome. Today is the 22nd day of Tammuz, the 28th day of July, and we're starting a new parsha. This week we have two Torah portions that are connected, Matot and Massei, and with these two we will finish the book of Numbers. And next week we'll be beginning the book of Deuteronomy. So the first reading of Matot is about, well, it has a couple of topics, but the first topic is the vows and oaths that a person can take. The stress in the first portion is on vows taken by a woman who is either in her father's house, or she's already betrothed to be married, or she's in her husband's house. And there's a very special relationship between the daughter and the father, or between the betrothed woman and her soon-to-be husband, or the woman and her husband. And it is that the woman can take upon herself an oath. An oath would be like saying, I take upon myself with an oath to do so and so. And the father or betrothed man or her husband has the opportunity to annul the oath, meaning, in a certain sense, to allow her to get out of what she took upon herself. We're not going to deal so much with the particulars of the teaching here, but what we want to talk about is that this is to understand how incredible a power this is. In principle, the way to think about this is, and by the way, a man can do the same thing, but then the only way a man can get out of his oath is if he comes to a sage. The woman can also come to a sage, and the sage can also annul it by asking them certain questions about their psychological state when they took the oath and so on, and perhaps annulling it. But what's amazing about this is when we think about this for a few minutes, we'll see that the Torah is actually giving us the power of extending the Torah. Because the Torah is full of 248 prescriptive commandments and 365 prohibitive. And in principle, those are all the commandments. And God prescribed or prohibited these. But the power of the oath, the neder in Hebrew, is the power to actually make a new commandment in a certain sense, because this is an obligating commandment for the person who takes the oath. It doesn't obligate anybody else, but it does obligate them. So in a certain sense, this is an incredible power to extend the Torah for a person to become, in a sense, a partner with God, to do what God did when He gave the Torah, prescribe and prohibit. Now, there's something that we need to know about this. We talk in length about this possibility of taking an oath and what it means psychologically in our series on what we call Jewish coaching or faith and confidence. You can find it on my personal Patreon, patreon.com/mgenuth. But you can find it also from time to time. We speak about this in Wonders, in Rav Ginsburg's writings. There is a very important caveat to everything we just said, which is the Maimonides writes that we don't make oaths anymore. We don't use this power that God gave us. And there's a whole question about why not? This is such a powerful force in a person's life. It's a very powerful motivator to do things. It's a very powerful motivator to refrain from things. So why do we not utter these oaths and say, I take upon myself by oath so and so? Why does Maimonides write that in our day and age we don't do this? All the more so since even taking a vow, which is even in some ways more powerful than an oath, but it's the same idea, is actually a commandment from the Torah. Uvishmo tishaveh, and you shall make a vow in His name. And the Torah actually seems to encourage this, because again, it's a very powerful inner motivator for a person to do things that are not prescribed normally by the Torah, but they're things that he or she thinks are very important for their development in life. So why is it that Maimonides takes this away? So really this has to do with a much larger topic, which especially troubles people who are Balei Tshuva, people who return to Jewish observance, and many times they read in a book that there is a certain custom, for instance, or even a mitzvah. The example of a mitzvah that we don't do today is blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the year, is on a Shabbat, on a Saturday. The sages prohibit us from doing this. They have the reasons, we're not going to get into why, but this is also very surprising. How can they do that? It's a mitzvah prescribed by the Torah. Well, it's what we call a messianic power. The messianic power in the individual is to make an oath. The messianic power in the sages is to, as is needed, to sometimes prohibit us from doing something that the Torah even prescribes. But this is not the end of the story. Hasidic thought is still confounded by this. How come the sages have such a power? What is really going on here? The answer that's given in all the Hasidic writings is that whatever the blowing of the shofar does, whatever it achieves, on Shabbat is achieved without blowing the shofar. In other words, that whatever the blowing of the shofar achieved in us psychologically, the Shabbat already does in us anyway. And so even though the shofar is not blown, in terms of our standing before God, we're standing as if we have heard the sound of the shofar, even when we haven't blown it, because it's a Shabbat on which the first day of Rosh Hashanah occurs. This is a very important principle, because what this is saying is that if you see a custom, for instance, a lot of people see, many people that return to observance, they are really taken in by the beauty of the customs of the Kabbalistic tradition. One of these is the requirement that on Shabbat we have not just 2 loaves of bread, but actually 12. And then they come to a Hasidic home, and they see that there's only 2 loaves of bread. And they wonder, what happened to the other 10? Where'd they go? And they ask. And sometimes the household is knowledgeable, and they say, yes, it's true, that's what the Arizal said, that's what Rabbi Isaac Luria said, but we don't do that. Because in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Law, even the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, who was a tremendous Kabbalist, said that this is not for everyone. Some people should, some people shouldn't. That is something of a letdown. But here we got something very important, and that's the same principle as blowing the shofar or not blowing it on Shabbat. Our generations are generations where the weight, the major focus of our divine service is internal. There's a lot of things that we can't do, not just because they're customs that we don't do because they're not for everyone. Many things that we can't do because we don't have the temple. Now that doesn't mean that we've given up on them. No, but we understand that our generation, the generation that is very much awake in terms of its yearning for God, that's very much awake in terms of its willing to commit to following God's commandments, is still a generation of exile, and our focus is psychological, it's internal. So, when it comes to, for instance, this idea of not taking an oath and not making a vow, the reason is because our psychological makeup is such that we can do the same thing without ever uttering those words. In fact, for us, this is the right way to make a vow. So it doesn't mean that you don't make vows and you don't have oaths. You do. but you can't utter them. You can't make them into the legal sense of a vow or an oath. But the power that we have inside to be able to extend the Torah, to use our psychological strength to do things that are seemingly beyond our reach normally, using this idea of becoming like God in the sense of being able to prescribe or prohibit something that the Torah doesn't. That is the hallmark of our generations. Our generations are the generations of the Hasidic tradition, where the crux of the work that we do is internal and not necessarily needs to be externalized. So with this we begin our week. God willing, we'll continue tomorrow. I hope to see you again.